Hoo hoo. If I were to ask you, what are some of the best fictional stories ever told, what would you say? War and Peace? Moby Dick? The Brothers Karamazov? The Brothers Karamazov? Or the Super Mario Brothers movie? Well, these are great and all, but it's time to throw all that shit in the trash. Hollow Knight's story literally has everything. Action, betrayal, comedy, tragedy, relatable characters, multiple endings, and sex appeal. Lots and lots of sex appeal. Of course, it's all very nuanced. Remember how confusing Inception was? Well, Hollow Knight is basically Inception, but with bugs. So if you want to truly understand Hollow Knight, we're gonna have to go deeper. So just call me Matt Damon, because this is Hollow Knight Explained. First, let's talk about how the story for Hollow Knight came to be. Pretty much all of Hollow Knight was made by these three guys: William Pellin, Ari Gibson, and Dave Kazi. Also Matt Griffin helped out too. These three men live in the mystical land of Australia, where everything is upside down. Their design philosophy for Hollow Knight was to leave the script blank while creating the game's world. Basically, they put whatever locations, dungeons, bosses, or gameplay mechanics they wanted in the game, and then they built the lore around those elements. The dialogue for the game was written together in a Google document by William and Ari later on in the game's development. The game script ended up being over 20,000 words long, which is not too bad for a game where you can literally skip the majority of the text. And there's still more to come. As of right now, Hollow Knight will be getting 2 more content updates and a Hornet DLC. So while this video will be pretty comprehensive, we are still waiting for a few more pieces to the puzzle. Alright, so now it's time to talk about the game's plot. But first, we need to talk about metaphysics. There are 3 different metaphysical forces that the player interacts with during the game. Soul, a white liquidy goop; Void, a black liquidy goop; and Essence, a substance that is neither liquidy nor goopy. In Hollow Knight, Soul is used to cast spells, as well as repair the Knight's shell. Soul originates in living organisms and acts as a sort of life force. Void works kinda like Play-Doh. It can be morphed into different shapes and given form. The Knight is made of Void, for example. The only place where Void is known to come from is in the Abyss, an area at the very bottom of the world map. Essence is basically the light found within dreams, whatever that means. It can be found within whispering roots and in the many ghosts that populate the world. Essence is collected using the Dream Nail, a powerful weapon that can cut through the veil that separates the real world from the dream world. The player character travels to the dream world several times in the game to fight several bosses, and its features are vaguely defined. All it is just a bunch of rocks and floating lampposts. You know, the stuff that pretty much everyone dreams about. Now that we've established some of the forces that act in this world, let's talk about the history of Hallownest before the game started. The oldest objects that can be found in Hollow Knight are the arcane eggs and the soul totems. These objects were created by an ancient society that existed long before Hallownest. This civilization knew how to harness and use soul, and they were probably aware of the Void's existence. The designs of the soul totems were most likely based on the creatures that lived during that time. On the other hand though, some of the totems are pretty phallic looking. I'll blur them out just in case. There are also some ancient creatures still farting around in the game, albeit mostly in the form of dead bodies. In Kingdom's Edge, there's a giant corpse located next to the Quick Slash charm. In the game's code, this being is referred to as the Ancient Nailsmith. There is also an ancient being hidden inside of the Abyss, where the Lifeblood Core is found. This guy is hidden really well. When I recorded this footage, I didn't even know he was there. The game refers to this thing as an Abyss creature, and that's about all we know. Is this creature the source of lifeblood? The blue liquidy goop that exists all over Hallownest? Maybe, but I wouldn't expect an answer anytime soon. The most important ancient creatures that we know about are called worms. These worms were probably similar in anatomy to regular worms, but much bigger in regard to the rest of the world. Bardoon, an NPC found at Kingdom's Edge, claims to be too small to be a worm, but is incredibly long himself, with his head being at the top of the map and his tail being quite a ways down. It is likely that these worms were higher beings, a phrase that occasionally pops up in the game. The developer's notes clarify that higher beings are godlike creatures. We can infer from Bardoon's dialogue that all of the worms are now gone, possibly dead, but the corpse of one worm can still be found in Kingdom's Edge. According to Bardoon, this worm did not die, but instead transformed. We know from Bardoon and other sources that the transformed worm was the Pale King, the creator and ruler of Hallownest. Before the Pale King began trying to build his nation, there were other powerful beings already at work within the lands of Hallownest, one of which being the Radiance. The Radiance is the true final boss and main antagonist of the game. She is a moth-like creature who is often referenced to in-game as a light. She tends to appear to bugs in her dreams, and it is mentioned that the Radiance shares some similarities to Essence. The Radiance only appears in the dream world in-game, so it's unknown if she ever existed in the physical world. Her sex is stated as female in a developer's note inside the game's code. The Radiance created the moth race, who worshipped her and basked in her light. The Radiance's light is described by Bardoon as a sort of unity at the cost of thought. Once you drink the Kool-Aid, you become connected and powerful, but you lose control of yourself, becoming a mindless bug. Other groups in the area included the Mantis tribe, who took residence in the fungal wastes, and the bees, who likely lived in the hive at Kingdom's Edge. Respect and power in the Mantis tribe was based upon physical strength and combat abilities. The strongest members of the group were also the most valued. Not much is known about the bees, other than that they're scary as fuck. In Greenpath, there appeared to be a group of followers of a creature called Un. There's a structure located at the Lake of Un that looks like some sort of temple, and Un can be found hidden in the lake. Un is the being supposedly responsible for producing the plant life in Greenpath. There's also a Moss Knight that stands at the edge of the lake, and if we dream nail him, he says something interesting. He says that she is calling. Now I have no idea who else this guy would be referring to other than Un, so I think this pretty much confirms that she's a chick. And I gotta say, that is one gorgeous gastropod. The mushrooms of the fungal wastes also had some sort of society. They're able to communicate with each other through a manner similar to telepathy. This telepathy seems to involve something with spores, since the lore tablets in the area only activate when the knight is wearing the Spore Shroom charm. Within the game's code, there's a lore tablet that reads as follows: Strengthen the shared self, strengthen the mind united. In every bug that would pass upon our roads, only the melancholy of disparity. Now I have no idea what the shit at the end is talking about, but the beginning clearly indicates that the mushrooms have some sort of connected consciousness. There's more evidence for this in the form of Mr. Mushroom. So if you haven't seen this guy around, he's basically just a talking fortune cookie that pops up in various parts of Hallownest. The thing is, with the exception of the last encounter, every time you try and talk to Mr. Mushroom, he seems to be talking to someone else. And when he notices that you're there, he just leaves. Clearly Mr. Mushroom is using the shared mind to talk to other mushrooms. When Mr. Mushroom finally does talk to the knight, he reveals that he has visited many kingdoms before, and that Hallownest is just one of many. If we dream nail Mr. Mushroom, he provides us with a little poem about worms. It seems to imply that worms have been creating societies for a long time. Then, there's the bugs in Deep Nest. Now you're probably wondering, did these assholes worship a god too? Well, maybe. In Deep Nest there's a shrine located in the Beast's Den. Inside the shrine is a statue of a trilobite. And, as I'm sure we all know, trilobites are one of the oldest known groups of arthropods. They went extinct in the mass extinction of the Permian back 252 million years ago. So in other words, these guys are ancient. Trilobites belong to the subphylum Trilobitomorpha. Their closest living relatives are the animals in the subphylum Chelicerata, which consists of horseshoe crabs, scorpions, and spiders. So it kinda makes sense that there's a trilobite statue in Deep Nest. It seems to be implying that the residents of Deep Nest have been there for quite some time. For some reason, there are no lore tablets in Deep Nest, so that's about as much as we can figure out at the moment. On top of that, we're going to learn a lot more about Deep Nest in the upcoming content pack, so I wouldn't even get too worked up about figuring it out now. And so the Pale King arrived in this fractured land, offering a gift to the bugs of his future kingdom. He granted them some form of knowledge or greater sentience. A hidden lore tablet in the White Palace reveals the line, The Wyrm becomes beacon, minds expanded, to yield, to devote. Also, Modamon the Teacher in her poem Elegy of Hallownest mentions that the Pale King taught the bugs of Hallownest and tamed their savage souls. Bardoon explains that the Pale King brought order to the land. So, if we put it all together, the Pale King granted bugs more powerful minds and promised a more ordered society. Now this is where things get a little bit complicated. Did these bugs without minds not have them because that was how they naturally were? Or was it because the Radiance had them within her hive mind? A lot of what I've read online says that all of Hallownest was under the Radiance's control, but it is never explicitly stated if the Radiance was worshipped by bugs other than the Moth tribe. The only moth in the game, the Seer, who lives in the Resting Grounds, explains that her ancestors stopped worshipping the Radiance in order to worship the Pale King. She does not mention other non-moth bugs engaging in worshipping the Radiance. Also, a tablet in Howling Cliffs states that anyone who leaves Hallownest must relinquish the precious mind this kingdom grants. Personally, I think that the Radiance was only worshipped by the moth race, and that many of the other bugs in Hallownest, specifically the husks, had always just been dumb shits. They didn't have minds to think in the first place. I'm not saying there's no evidence to support the idea that the Radiance controlled all of Hallownest, but I haven't really seen enough evidence to convince me of that. My biggest reason for believing this is because of the way I interpret Seer's dialogue. Seer doesn't blame the Radiance for what happened, but instead blames the people of her tribe. She never claims that the Radiance was an evil or power-hungry god, but that she was betrayed. Seer views helping the knight obtain the Dream Nail as penitence for old crimes. So on one hand, Seer thinks that her ancestors should have remained loyal to the Radiance, but at the same time she is willing to help the knight in its quest to kill the Radiance. The only way this makes sense is if the Radiance of the past was quite different to the Radiance of the present. After all, members of the Moth race were pacifists by nature, with few ever choosing to wield a weapon. Given the fact that she is also a moth, the Radiance was possibly quite pacifist in the beginning, that is, until the Pale King arrived and fucked everything up for her. After such a betrayal, as well as an extended time spent in isolation, it's not a stretch to believe that the Radiance would retaliate in the way she did. So, there's my little theory on the Radiance. Some of you watching may not agree with me, but that's what I really love about Hollow Knight's story. A lot of different people have a lot of different ideas about how certain things happened, and the game leaves it just vague enough to let all of those theories be viable. Hell, there's probably evidence to support the idea that the entire game takes place on the fucking moon. So while a good chunk of the stuff in this video is probably agreed upon by a lot, I'll let you know whenever I start throwing out my own dumbass theories. Regardless, the important thing to take away from all this is that the Pale King endowed his followers with more intelligence, and then he convinced the Moth tribe to stop worshipping the Radiance. Because the Moth tribe stopped worshipping her, the Radiance was sealed away and memories of her were forgotten over time. The only lasting monument to the Radiance was a statue located at Hallownest's crown. Seer looks back on this moment with regret, viewing it as a betrayal of her people on their creator. It was out of this act that Hallownest was born. While the Moth tribe and others accepted the Pale King's rule, there were other groups that resisted. The bees, for example, chose to lock themselves away in the hive at Kingdom's Edge, deciding to play no part in the Pale King's kingdom. According to the manual for Hollow Knight, the Hive Queen eventually became too big to even leave. Every time I read this, I just end up thinking about Fight Club. The Mantis race refused the king's rule, but a truce was reached allowing them to keep their territory as well as their societal structure. In exchange, the Mantises would protect Hallownest from the bugs invading from Deep Nest. We don't know for sure how Oon and its followers reacted. The size of Greenpath was reduced, but the remaining area of Greenpath remained under Oon's law. The members of the Mushroom Kingdom accepted the Pale King's rule, but not with complete confidence. According to the lore tablets in the Fungal Wastes, they put faith in the Pale King's insight into future events to protect them, which is a power that he apparently had. Bardoon is the only other NPC that even mentions this ability, which is weird because it's kind of a big fucking deal, but it doesn't really seem to have much of an impact on the story, so whatever, it is what it is. The bugs of Deep Nest refused the king's rule completely, keeping themselves separate from the Pale King's domain. The Mask Maker, who resides in Deep Nest, says that the Pale King made a mistake in trying to expand his kingdom across all of Hallownest. Under the Pale King's rule, the City of Tears was constructed. For some reason, Somebody thought it was a good idea to build the entire city underneath the giant lake, resulting in constant rain. It may be stupid, but goddamn, it makes for some good atmospheric moments. Underneath the city, the royal waterways were built, where horrific parasite monsters began to appear. Stag stations were built, making travel across the kingdom much easier. Structures such as the Archive and the Colosseum of Fools popped up. Bugs began working in the mines, harvesting powerful crystals. Geo was established as a primary currency, and reputable banking services became available, allowing citizens to store all that shit they found while smacking rocks all day. King's idols began to circulate around the land so that bugs could worship the Pale King on the go. A tramway system began development, but as construction reached Deep Nest, all of the workers got killed by local bugs. As you can imagine, this really slowed down construction. The tram workers unionized, demanding to not be sent places where they could get killed. Ridiculous, I know, but after the events of Tramgate, it seemed pretty obvious that Deep Nest and Hallownest were not going to be getting along anytime soon. Now you might be thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute. If the Deep Nest bugs didn't want a tramway, why is there a stag station in the distant village? Well, don't worry, we will get to that later. But let's talk about the man behind it all. The Pale King himself lived a life of reclusion. Relic Seeker Lem, a bug in the City of Tears who buys historical artifacts, claims that the king was an elusive figure. The Last Stag also mentions that the Pale King never rode the stagways. Even the Pale King's castle was kept hidden. His White Palace was built underneath the City of Tears in the ancient basin, a dark area with little life in it. Despite his introverted lifestyle, the king did get together with this whatever this is, and she became queen. The queen is likely also a higher being, according to the description found on the King's Soul. The queen can be found in-game, going by the name White Lady. The Pale King also assigned 5 knights to the task of protecting the realm of Hallownest. The 5 Great Knights, as they were called, consisted of Fierce Drea, Kindly Isma, Mysterious Zemir, Loyal Ulgrim, and Mighty Hegemol. Not much is known about what these knights did before the fall of Hallownest, other than that they served the king. The White Defender's entry in the Hunter's Journal gives us the most insight into the shenanigans of the 5 Great Knights. He mentions the Champion's Call, the Knotted Grove, and the Battle of the Black Wyrm. Now that's a badass name for a battle. But what is the Black Wyrm? Is its corpse somewhere in Hallownest too? So there's some flavor text for you letting you know that the 5 Great Knights were apparently some pretty cool dudes. But as impressive as these events may sound, the king and his knights were nowhere near prepared for what happened next. Remember how I said that the Radiance had been completely forgotten? Well, I lied. According to the seer, faint memories of the Radiance lingered until eventually they surfaced once again. One theory suggests that some bugs accidentally discovered the statue at Hallownest's crown, resulting in thoughts of her to enter back into their minds. Within the game's code are additional verses to the Elegy of Hallownest that cannot be found in-game. The poem mentions that the bugs of Hallownest had dreams and desires that the Pale King could not satisfy. Eventually, out of these dreams appeared a light that turned the bugs back into mindless beasts. In the game, the player can encounter an NPC named Myla. Myla is a happy little miner bug who mines crystals while singing a tune. As the game progresses, Myla begins to lose control of her thoughts, not being able to remember the verses to her song. A second voice begins to appear in her dialogue, an angry voice that demands Myla to kill the player character. Eventually, Myla becomes just another enemy NPC.
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes, got no...
While many bugs shared the same fate as Myla, some looked for solutions. In the City of Tears, a group of intellectual bugs began to experiment with soul. They believed that with enough soul, they could remain powerful enough to escape the infection. The collection of souls involved the killing of hundreds of bugs whose shells could still be found in the Soul Sanctuary, or the Soul Sanctum, or whatever it was. The Pale King was against these experiments, but I guess these criminals were just too well hidden to find. The experiments failed anyway, and the Soul Master and his associates became infected. After getting his ass kicked twice by the player character, the Soul Master explains that a prophetic vision told him to experiment with soul. Yeah, okay, buddy. Most of the Mantis race was able to stave off the infection, keeping Mantis Village intact despite the surrounding chaos. Within the tribe, however, a group of Mantises defected and decided to accept the infection in order to become more powerful. One of the 4 Mantis Lords turned against his sisters, and he and his allies were driven out of Mantis Village and took up residence in the Queen's Garden. After accepting the infection, these Mantises went mad and lost control of their minds. The Traitor Lord's daughter somehow died during these events and is buried in Queen's Garden. This unnamed Mantis was actually in a relationship with mysterious Zemir, one of the 5 Great Knights. The Mantises didn't approve of this, however, and now Zemir lives as the Grey Mourner in the resting grounds, lamenting her dead lover. Who would have guessed that Mantises were so homophobic? With the infection spreading across Hallownest, the Pale King became desperate to find a solution. The 5 Great Knights served as nothing but a waste of taxpayers' geo. Because the infection was targeting the minds and dreams of bugs, another method had to be used in order to combat the Radiance. Deep down in the abyss, the Pale King found the Void, and possibly the last hope for Hallownest.
Now let's talk about the Void. The Pale King is basically playing with fire at this point. Void itself is a dangerous force. It seems to oppose other forms of life, always trying to consume them. That is why the character Shade and the other Shades, called the Siblings, attack the Knight. The Lighthouse Keeper in the Abyss seems to have been influenced and possibly killed by the Void somehow. Confessor Gigi in Dirtmouth is terrified of the Shades, fearing that she might get swallowed up by the darkness. That's right, the Knight might seem like a little harmless guy, but underneath the surface is a monster that wants nothing more than to do terrible things to you. Kinda like Bill Cosby. As for the lighthouse, it seems like it was built as a way to subdue the sea of void beneath it. But it sounds like at some point the king wanted the lighthouse turned off. Why? Honestly, I have no clue. Using the void, the Pale King hoped to create something that could act as a vessel to contain the Radiance. This vessel had to be completely lacking in mind, will, or personality. Without these traits, the infection would not be able to control the host, and the Radiance would be stopped dead in her tracks. The Pale King began experimenting with the void. Several creatures were made in the White Palace using the void, such as the King's Molds and the Wings Molds, as well as the Collector, a boss that can be found in the Tower of Love. The Pale King started creating countless vessels in an attempt to create one that was completely empty. These vessels were unique to the previously mentioned constructs. King's Molds and Wings Molds are void contained within armor, while the Collector seems to be made solely of void. The vessels, however, wear shells. The game doesn't explain where these shells came from, but a metric fuck ton of them can be found in the Abyss. Well, put on your tinfoil hats, boys, because it's time to speculate. The White Lady has some interesting dialogue about this event. She explains that she locked herself away in the Queen's Garden. Her reason appears to be that she felt shame for her participation in the deed. She then mentions that she still has the urge to breed and propagate herself. I think that the Queen helped create the vessels, specifically by using her seeds. This biological origin for the vessels could explain where the shells came from, and it explains why there are eggs lying around in the Abyss. Thanks to dialogue from the White Lady, we know that the player character was born in the Abyss, not in the White Palace. And it makes sense with the phrase born of God and void, which is later used to describe the Hollow Knight. Also, in the White Palace, a room that appears to be a nursery can be found. In this room is a chair, with what appears to be the White Lady's silhouette on it, and a cradle. What's interesting about this is that there is a melody that plays in this room which is identical to the melody that plays when the player character's Shade is nearby. This practically screams that the White Lady had at least something to do with the creation of the vessels, but I'm sure this little theory of mine is littered with problems. So for now, the takeaway from all this is that the Pale King created a lot of vessels in an attempt to find one that was perfectly empty.
Any vessels not deemed worthy were cast down into the abyss. The vessel that the player controls during the game is one of the Pale King's many failed creations. They were thrown into the abyss and another vessel was chosen, who eventually would become the Hollow Knight, the not true final boss of the game. After the Hollow Knight was chosen, the entrance to the abyss was sealed, hiding the Pale King's rejected children from the world. Somehow, the Radiance was placed inside the Hollow Knight. I don't really know the logistics of how that worked, and honestly, I don't want to know. The hope was that, without a will or mind, the Radiance would not be able to take control of the Hollow Knight's body. But of course, it didn't work. The White Lady mentions that the Hollow Knight was not completely void of thought, that it was tarnished by an idea instilled. There's not much we can look to try and figure out what the White Lady means by this, but there is one thing. In the scene where the Hollow Knight is chosen by the Pale King, we see it turn its head towards the player character. Is it because the Hollow Knight has feelings of regret, sympathy, maybe even guilt? Why them? Why were they chosen while all the other siblings were thrown away? Maybe the Hollow Knight was afraid. Maybe it didn't think it could live up to the pressure of being the vessel. It didn't ask for this. It didn't ask to be born. Maybe it didn't want to be the savior of Hallownest. I mean, what did Hallownest ever do for it? What made Hallownest so special that it even deserved to be saved? After all, isn't life just a cyclical process of birth and death? Why should Hallownest be spared a fate given to every kingdom that preceded it? You can't stop the inevitable. Everything dies in the end, and nothing really matters. Or maybe I'm reading too much into this. Anyways, the Pale King's plan had failed. His creation could not contain the Radiance's power, and soon she would break free once again. But instead of giving up, the Pale King devised another scheme. He sought the assistance of three powerful bugs, Modamon the Teacher, Lurin the Watcher, and Hura the Beast. Lurin lived in a spire in the City of Tears. There he kept a telescope, which is kinda creepy if you think about it. Modamon maintained an archive in the Fog Canyon. There, she tried to keep all the information of Hallownest's history. Unfortunately, all of her data logs read like bad George Orwell fanfiction. Hura was queen and ruler in the domain of Deepnest. As I'm sure you remember, relations between Deepnest and Hallownest were not that good. While the other two were okay with doing the king a solid, Hura was a bit more difficult. But a deal was struck. Hura agreed to help the Pale King, but in exchange the Pale King had to give her a child, Hornet. The circumstances of Hornet's birth are shrouded in mystery. Is she Hura's biological offspring, or was she created from the void like the siblings? The White Lady mentions a sexual relationship between the Pale King and Hura. She also mentions that Hura and Hornet look very similar. So it sounds like the King and Hura totally did it, and Hornet's their baby, right? Well, not so fast. If Hura could give birth in the first place, why would the King have to give her a child? Is she barren? Is Hura just bad at dating? Well, a tablet in the fungal waste hints at Deepnest once having a king, but that he somehow died. So it seems possible that the death of the king simply left Hura without a suitable mate. So yeah, something was definitely going on between the Pale King and Hura. The stag station in Deepnest was probably built around the time this was going on. The Pale King could just hop on his elite special forces stag, head over to Hura's place, and have crazy bug sex with her. That would explain why the last stag has never seen the stag station in the distant village, or the hidden station. While this all makes sense, there is also evidence that points towards Hornet being made from the void, like the knight and the siblings, which, if true, complicates things a little bit. Hornet tells the player character that they share the same force. Well, we know that the player character is made of void, so it seems likely that Hornet was created in a similar fashion. Plus, Hornet is called the gendered child by a number of NPCs. The only reason they would call her that is if her kind wouldn't normally have a gender, and according to the developer's notes, the vessels made from the void do not have genders. There's also the Weaver's Den, a hidden area in Deepnest that appears to be connected to Hornet in some way. The loom spiders mention a bargain and a princess. Within this hidden area is another hidden area. In this room, there's a design with Hornet's head displayed in the middle. Plus, all the string lying around makes sense given that Hornet uses thread in combat. When you leave the Weaver's Den for the first time, you see this loom spider run away. There's no real explanation about this, but I'm guessing the upcoming Hornet DLC will shed more light on what's going on here. Also, Midwife is clearly involved in Hornet's creation, but she doesn't really tell us much about how exactly Hornet was created. Honestly, unless we can get all these guys on Mori,
we're not going to know for sure. And so, with the Pale King and Hera's deal struck, she, Lurin, and Motomon became the Dreamers. The Hollow Knight was chained up in the Temple of the Black Egg, and the Dreamers went into an endless slumber, where they placed a seal over the temple from the dream world. 2 memorials were built, one in the City of Tears, and one in the Resting Grounds, to commemorate the sacrifices made. Also, at some point between all this, the Hollow Knight hit puberty or something. This has actually led to a lot of questions being asked about why the Hollow Knight grew, but none of the other siblings grew. My theory? Flintstone chewable vitamins. So at this point, the Radiance was trapped inside a vessel that was chained up inside a temple that was surrounded by an interdimensional telepathic force field, stationed all the way up at the top of the world. And it didn't work. It was at this point when the Pale King and the White Palace suddenly vanished into thin air. The White Lady and fierce Daira retreated to the Queen's Garden. Daira died fighting off infected mantises, while the White Lady rooted herself into the ground. Mighty Hegemol got his armor stolen by a maggot, who the player later finds under the name False Knight. Yeah, nice job, Mighty Hegemol. But this doesn't mean that Hegemol is dead, however. On August 6, 2017, Team Cherry held an AMA on Reddit where they answered questions about the game. It was revealed in this thread that Hegemol could live without his armor. Which makes sense. I mean, I certainly hope he wasn't born wearing a giant suit of armor. Mysterious Zamir remained in the Resting Grounds, waiting for some poor sucker to attempt her soul-crushing side quest so they could get a piece of heart. Loyal Ogrim moved into the Royal Waterways and changed his name to Dung Defender. Now, I'm not going to be too hard on this guy. We all have our fetishes. It may not be coprophilia, but to each their own, you know? But Ogrim's love is not exclusive to excrement. He acts as the protector of Isma's Grove, as is only accessible after beating him in combat. Isma's Grove is the grove where kindly Isma is. She is dead by the time the player finds her, however. It is clear from the Dunk Defender's dialogue that Ogrim and Isma had some sort of relationship. As to whether or not he gave her a dirty Sanchez or something, I don't know. The game never discloses Hornet's whereabouts during all this. At some point, it seems possible that she spent a good deal of time with the White Lady. This would make sense because the White Lady could have been the one who explained to Hornet everything she knows about how to stop the infection. In the previously mentioned Reddit AMA, a developer from Team Cherry mentioned the original plans for Hornet's lore. They involved Hornet being raised by Hera, the White Lady, and Vespa, the Queen of the Hive, hence the name Hornet. This is actually pretty badass, but we don't know for sure if this is still Hornet's backstory in the game. Over time, the player character and several other failed vessels escape the Abyss, ending up in various locations. The player character leaves Hallownest and wanders into the wilderness beyond the Howling Cliffs. At this point, the collapse of Hallownest seemed inevitable. The kingdom was sealed away from the rest of the world, with the well in Dirtmouth being one of the only ways to get back inside. Dirtmouth itself remained unaffected because of its location on the surface. Oh, I guess it was that easy. But slowly, the bugs that lived there decided to travel into Hallownest, leaving the Elder Bug as one of the few remaining survivors. Time within the kingdom froze, and Hallownest was left in complete stasis. And basically, that's all that happens before the game starts. For the rest of this video, I'll explain the plot as if the player is going for the Dream No More ending, which is the good ending to the game. The player character, who I will refer to as the Knight, is called back to Hallownest by some force. They arrive in Dirtmouth and descend into Hallownest. The Knight encounters Hornet, who at first dismisses their abilities. Hornet again appears in the City of Tears where she encourages the Knight to travel to Kingdom's Edge, to the corpse of the Pale King's original form. During this conversation, Hornet says that the Knight holds the resilience of 2 voids. The 2 voids she is referring to are the void the Knight is made of, and the void that exists outside of Hallownest. Leaving Hallownest appears to cause bugs to lose their memories, or even their minds. Quirrell is an example of a bug that lost his memory from entering the void beyond Hallownest. Quirrell was originally an assistant to Motomon. When the Knight meets Quirrell at the beginning of the game, however, he has no recollection of any of this. This means that the Knight probably has no memory of anything at the start of the game. At Kingdom's Edge, Hornet challenges the Knight one last time. The Knight wins and they travel into the corpse of Wyrm where they obtain the King's brand, which allows the Knight to travel into the Abyss. At some point, the Knight visits the Dreamer's shrine in the Resting Grounds, where the Dreamers appear to the Knight. The Dreamers admit that their powers are not working to stop the infection,
but remember that their sworn duty to the king is to keep the seal in place. At this point, Modamon, Lurin, and Hera make the executive decision to lock the knight away forever in the dream world.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
But then the knight is immediately rescued by some flying moth creature. Yeah, the dreamers really suck at their job.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
This moth gives the knight a little pep talk before giving them the dream nail. After this sequence, the knight awakens in the presence of the seer, the sole survivor of the moth race. The seer tells the knight to obtain essence in order to sharpen the dream nail. Once the knight collects 1800 essence, the dream nail transforms into the awoken dream nail. With the dream nail, the knight breaks the seal on the Black Egg Temple by visiting the 3 dreamers and murdering them in their dreams, Freddy Krueger style. The knight travels to the Abyss, using the King's brand to unlock the gate that kept the realm sealed away for so long. There, the knight receives the Shade Cloak, which allows them to pass through these annoying ass barriers, which gives the knight access to the building in Queen's Garden where the reclusive White Lady lives. The White Lady gives the knight the first half of a charm called the King Soul, which is a symbol of the union between 2 higher beings. The second half of the King Soul is located in the White Palace, which can only be reached by using the awakened dream nail on the corpse of a king's mold in the ancient basin. After a ridiculous amount of platforming bullshit, the knight finds the second half of the King Soul, next to the corpse of the Pale King. But is the Pale King really dead? According to the manual for Hollow Knight, the king is just in hiding. Also, we're in the dream world, which could mean that this is just a memory of the Pale King and not the real Pale King. But we know that the real White Palace vanished and that this body is very close to where the palace originally stood, meaning that this could be the real White Palace inside the dream world with the real Pale King sitting dead on the throne. But the Pale King has been known to cheat death. It's possible that the Pale King reincarnated again into a different creature. Also, what would have even killed him? Did he accidentally walk into one of the hundreds of saw blades that he has around the castle? If that's the case, then he deserved to die. But there is a chance that the King Soul is literally the King Soul. Salubra, the bug that sells charms to the knight, reveals that some charms are created from the dying wishes of bugs. There are many charms in the game that confirm this, such as Joni's Blessing and Dashmaster. And after equipping the King Soul, the White Lady says she feels like she is in the presence of Wyrm once again. The Pale King might have died in the White Palace, and his wish to free Hallownest resulted in creating the King Soul. But if that's the case, why is the charm broken in half? Did the Queen take half of the King Soul after the Pale King died? And if the charm's description mentions a union, so the charm might have existed a long time before the King's death. But the Pale King's final words are, "No cost too great." Those sound like the words of a person who is willing to sacrifice himself to end the infection. But they never did find Tupac's body. And also, you're telling me that jet fuel can't even melt passports? And why is it that Ross Geller is 29 in seasons 3, 4, and 5 of Friends? There's only one plausible explanation, people. He's probably dead. Either way, the knight loots the body and the King Soul is complete. After obtaining the King Soul, the knight travels down into the abyss and a new area is unlocked. There, the knight can strike a big black ball with the awakened dream nail to reveal a flashback to when the Pale King and the Hollow Knight leave the abyss. The King Soul is then replaced by another charm called the Void Heart. According to the in-game description, the Void Heart unifies the void under the bearer's will. What I think is happening with this sphere is that the knight is hitting their own reflection with the dream nail, allowing them access into their own mind and memories. The King Soul turning into the Void Heart is what unlocks the new endings for the game. It's an important moment because now the knight is not just made of void, but has control over all of the void. Throughout the entire game, the Knight's Shade and the siblings attack the knight, but after obtaining the Void Heart, these enemies become docile. With complete control over all of the void, the knight now has enough power in order to defeat the Radiance once and for all. After obtaining the Void Heart, the knight enters the Temple of the Black Egg, unchains the Hollow Knight, and the two begin to fight. Partway through the battle, the Hollow Knight goes all 13 reasons why on us, and begins mutilating itself. A possible explanation for this is that the Hollow Knight is trying to help the knight by weakening itself. While not in the final game, the Dream Nail dialogue for the Hollow Knight has been data mined. Most of it just appears to be thoughts from the Radiance, things like "kill" and "shall blaze free." There are a few interesting lines here, however. "Kill the usurper. Our light, it would suffocate." This line implies that the knight will be able to contain the Radiance completely. Another interesting line seems to be coming from the Hollow Knight itself. "Father?" Yeah, that's weird. Maybe the Hollow Knight noticed the King's soul consumed inside the Void Heart, or maybe the King's brand, or maybe the poor thing has just gone insane. Regardless, these lines of dialogue were cut from the final game, so we have to be cautious when analyzing them. At some point during the fight, Hornet pierces the Hollow Knight's shell, and the Knight uses the Dream Nail to enter the Hollow Knight's mind. There, the Knight challenges the Radiance. During the fight, the Dream Nail can be used on the Radiance. She says things like, "Dawn shall break," and "I do not fear you." At some point, she calls the Knight her ancient enemy. Now when I hear this, the only two things I can think she's referring to are the Pale King or the Void. Without the Pale King, the Knight would probably never have existed, so that does make sense. Again, it's also possible that the Radiance detects the King's soul inside the Knight. However, maybe this dialogue is hinting at some greater fight between the Radiance and the Void. Maybe the Radiance and the Void have some other beef that happened long before the arrival of the Pale King. Maybe it had something to do with the fall of the ancient civilization that we learn about during the game. Who knows? Maybe Team Cherry will make a prequel saga to explain it all. Anyway, as the fight continues, the siblings and the Hollow Knight appear in the dream world and help the Knight corner the Radiance. The Void starts holding the Radiance down using its Void tentacles, and well, I think we've all seen enough hentai to know where this is going. Acting as one, the Void engulfs the Radiance in total darkness. After the battle ends, there's a cutscene showing the Void seeping into the ground. Hornet wakes up and finds the Knight's shattered shell, and a final shot shows siblings returning back into the earth. The Radiance has been consumed, and the infection has presumably ceased completely. Hopefully, this video was able to help you better understand the plot to Hollow Knight. It's definitely a bit more complicated than your average platformer. However, there are still many unanswered questions, like what's the deal with the bugs wearing masks? How does the Pale King's foresight abilities play into the story? Clearly there was some sort of plan put in place for the Knight to defeat the Radiance. Was the Pale King involved in this? And, most importantly, why the fuck are there goddamn jellyfish in a game about bugs? It makes no sense. Come on, Team Cherry. What kind of entomology textbooks are they selling you in Australia? But yeah, other than the jellyfish, this game is fucking perfect. I love everything about Hollow Knight. So, now that we've mapped out most of the plot to this game, what's the message? Is there a greater meaning to it all? People have argued that the White Walkers in Game of Thrones are an allegory for climate change. They're wrong, but maybe Hollow Knight has some sort of similar allegorical message. J.R.R. Tolkien flat out said that the Lord of the Rings is not an allegory at all. It's literally just about some short people with big feet who hate jewelry or something. Maybe Hollow Knight is a cautionary tale about the dangers of temptation and how we shouldn't let our desires control us. Maybe it's a story about the dangers of imperialism and how trying to destroy the cultures of others only leads to more destruction. Perhaps Hollow Knight is a tragic love story between an orphan girl and her mute, vertically challenged half-sibling. It might also be a warning about how exposed the human race is to disease and how easily a pandemic could wipe us all out. Or maybe moths are just assholes.